There is a particular kind of painter who does not seek to reinvent the world, but to reveal it. Not the painter who arrives like a storm, overturning everything before him, but the one who sits down in front of a human face and refuses to leave until he has understood it. Christiaan Nicolaas Everhard de Moor was such a painter. Working in the Dutch Republic during its long, golden twilight, he devoted his life and his skill to portraiture, to the ancient, endlessly difficult task of standing before another human being and asking, with his brushes and his eye, "Who are you really?" It is a question that never grows old. In de Moor's hands, it never grew easy. The Dutch portrait tradition that de Moor inherited was unlike anything else in European art. While painters in Italy and France were filling palace walls with gods and emperors, the Dutch were doing something stranger and more radical. They were painting people, merchants, regents, scholars, naval officers, and subjects who considered themselves ordinary, even when they were powerful, and who wanted to be painted honestly rather than glorified. The tradition that grew around them carried a distinct moral conviction that a human face, rendered with skill and without flattery, deserved to be taken as seriously as any saint or sovereign. That the inner life of a cloth merchant was as complex and as worthy of an artist's full attention as that of any Roman senator. This conviction produced, across the 17th century, a portrait tradition of extraordinary depth, from the loose, crackling energy of Frans Hals to the almost supernatural psychological penetration of Rembrandt. By the time de Moor came of age, that tradition had reached its summit and begun its long transformation. The great wave had passed, but a tradition does not vanish when its giants depart. It continues, carried by painters who understood what had been built and felt the weight of it. De Moor was one of those painters. He worked in what we might call the long afternoon of the Golden Age, a period less celebrated, less revolutionary, but no less serious. Painting in that afternoon demanded a specific discipline, the discipline of someone who cannot rely on the electricity of a new movement and must find his reasons for painting in the permanent, quiet truths of the craft itself. His work has often been compared to that of Caspar Netscher and Gottfried Schalken, painters who brought meticulous finish and delicate sensitivity to Dutch portraiture. Like them, de Moor was drawn to surface, the extraordinary way that paint, applied with sufficient patience, can convince you that you are looking at silk or lace or the soft grain of aging skin, but it would be a mistake to reduce him to a technician of surfaces. The surfaces matter because of what they carry. When he paints the folds of a velvet coat or a lace collar lying against a woman's throat, he is not showing off his facility with a brush. He is giving you evidence about a person's wealth, their taste, their sense of themselves in the world. His light is cool, even, and controlled. He does not use the theatrical chiaroscuro of Rembrandt with its dramatic shadows and spiritual intensity. De Moor's light illuminates without melodrama, and this restraint is itself a statement. I trust the subject. I do not need to theatricalize what is already interesting. His sitters are not made to look more powerful or more beautiful than they are. They are made to look, simply, themselves. And this is harder than it sounds. Imagine standing before one of his male portraits. A man of perhaps 55 seated against a plain, dark background. The face is the most alive thing in the painting, not because de Moor has done anything theatrical to draw you there, but because it is rendered with such completeness that it compels you. The light falls across the forehead and cheekbone with total consistency. The mouth is closed but not quite relaxed. There is a tension at the corners suggesting someone accustomed to keeping his thoughts to himself. The eyes meet yours without aggression and without concession. This is a man who has sat across from difficult people in difficult rooms and learned to give nothing away. And then you notice the hands. De Moor almost always gives you the hands. They rest in the sitter's lap, and they are less composed than the face. The grip on the chair arm is a fraction tighter than ease would require, the fingers not quite still. Something is being managed. Something is being held back. His portraits of women carry a different and equally powerful quality. Where his men tend towards self-possession, a composure that reflects their public roles, his women carry an interiority that is harder to name and harder to forget. He returns several times to a particular composition, a woman in the three-quarter view, her gaze turned slightly away from the viewer, as though interrupted in the middle of a thought. The fabrics in these portraits are magnificent. Heavy satins, fine muslins rendered with such precision, you can feel their weight, but it is not the fabric that holds you. It is the expression, or rather the near expression, the face on the verge of something it has decided not to say. There is something in these portraits that we might call longing, not for anything specific, but the general, unresolvable longing of an intelligent person living inside the constraints of their time. De Moor does not editorialize. He does not tell you whether his women are happy or thwarted. He simply sees them with such patience and such completeness that you feel admitted into something private, something the sitter herself might not have known she was revealing. This is the highest thing a portrait painter can achieve. Not to capture a likeness, but to capture a life. Technically, De Moor worked with the discipline of someone who had fully absorbed his inheritance. His brushwork is smooth, precise, and largely invisible. Invisible in the way that great technique always tends to disappear into its subject. When you look at one of his portraits, you do not think about paint. You think about the person. The painter has stepped back and made himself transparent, and this self-effacement is, paradoxically, one of the most deliberate choices he made. It requires a particular kind of confidence, large enough to trust itself completely, and secure enough to want no credit for the trust. His palette is restrained but never cold. He works in the warm ochres and umbers of the Dutch tradition, balanced against the cooler silvers of lace and the neutral grounds he preferred. Colour in De Moor is never accidental. It is always in relationship, always doing something, and the occasional deeper note, a blue, a red arriving like a low tone in a quiet piece of music, lands with quiet force precisely because it has been so carefully prepared for. We should ask what De Moor offers a viewer now, in the 21st century, what he provides that more famous painters do not. We live surrounded by images of faces faster and more numerous than any previous generation has known, and yet we rarely feel, looking at those faces, that we know anyone. De Moor's painted faces were built for a different kind of time. They were made to be looked at for minutes, not seconds, made in the assumption that a viewer would stay and return and look again. When you give a De Moor portrait the time it was made for, something happens that is difficult to describe, but impossible to mistake. You feel the presence of a person, not a type or a symbol, but an actual, specific, irreplaceable human being who once sat in a room in Amsterdam or The Hague and was seen, genuinely, carefully, completely seen, by another person with a brush in his hand. 3 centuries of silence, and the connection is still immediate. That is what paint can do in the hands of someone who understood what it was for. De Moor did not have the wind of a revolutionary moment at his back. He worked in the patient, unglamorous faithfulness to a craft because he believed the craft was worth it, because he believed that sitting down in front of a human face and refusing to leave until you had understood it was in itself a sufficient reason to be a painter. What he added to the tradition he inherited was, above all, attention to the people before him, to the surfaces of the world they inhabited, and to the endlessly difficult, endlessly renewable task of making a flat surface tell the truth about a human face. That attention is still visible in his work. It has not faded, and it still asks something of us in return, to slow down, to stay, and to look. There is no better argument for painting than that. Text developed in collaboration with Claude, Anthropic, 2026. Presenter's note: specific painting titles and their current locations can be verified via the RKD Netherlands Institute for Art History, rkd.nl, and the Rijksmuseum Collection database. If reproductions are projected during the presentation, the descriptive passages can be anchored to specific titled works for added force.